This evening we're presenting the third, and this is always, actually several of these are difficult. This is a little difficult. You'll catch it right off. But most of us have been presented a gospel that has left the meat out. And we've heard a gospel that's costless. And a gospel that is going to meet all of our natural needs. And it has robbed us from the way to an overcoming life. This third term is counting the cost and knowing what to expect. We're going to begin with counting the cost. Let me find my place here. I need to get my outline out. Let me just touch on one other thing. We have some guests this evening. The church has almost handled this issue of making disciples or being a disciple as an extracurricular activity. You've been made a Christian now, why don't you come on and be a disciple? Why don't you go further? Nowhere in the Word is it presented that way. It's the world that called us first Christians. And they did it in a very negative way. The Word makes that very clear. They were first called Christians at Antioch, and it wasn't by the disciples. The second mention is in Peter, and it was in a reviling way, a very negative way. And Peter was encouraging them to accept that. That's an honor. But through the first several centuries, even though it was being used, they were very reluctant to call themselves like Christ, even though that was the gospel. If you're not a disciple, you're not in the kingdom. If you're not a disciple of Christ, you're not. If you're not a disciple in the kingdom, you're not. It's the beginning place. Jesus said, go and make disciples. To who? To the John Browns? You know what it looks like when you make disciples to John Browns? I'm sitting with a good friend in a restaurant in Douglasville, and we're at a table, and over at this other 2 or 3 tables, there's probably 12 to 18 people, all in suits and dressed. And though we could not hear their conversation or know what they were talking about, just wasn't very long, we both knew they're Christians. And not only are they Christians, but they are Christian leaders. And we watched them for a while because we realized that not only were they Christian leaders, but we sort of knew what stream they were from by how they looked. Now, they weren't Quakers or Amish, which was so obvious. I mean, they were just dressed like we are, some with suits and the women. And before it was over, we wrote down on a piece of paper not only that they were Christians and Christian leaders, but they were national level leaders with some denomination, and we named the denomination, and we went up to them, and we were dead on. It's disciples unto Him that we are called to make men. It's bringing them to Jesus that He might make them. It's showing them the way to the way. And being with Him, they'll be made. That's our role, getting them with Him. So it begins with knowing that we've been called first to be a disciple. And after He has done His work of making us, then we should be honored to receive that Christian, like Christ. But I'm here to tell you our world does not see us like Christ. When He has made us, there will be no doubt. We're going to begin in Luke chapter 14. Counting the cost. Luke 14. Beginning in verse 28. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. By the way, John and Patty Brown have done this. In the year before Matthew Brown was born, we had gone into business in 1964, and all of a sudden I had all this business, and I was young, and we were developing this piece of land, tracts for other homes, and we're going to build our home, so our home ought to be one of the nicest in there, right? Well, our eyes were bigger than our billfold. Before it was over, our house and where we were financially was an embarrassment. The whole community knew that John Brown started something he couldn't finish. Well, the Lord bailed me out. And I learned a lesson. When is the time to count the cost of building a home? Before you begin. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? By the way, we're in a war. And what do you suppose the odds are? We're outnumbered more than 2 to 1. And when it becomes more like warfare to us, this particular illustration will become more important to us because we are outnumbered and in the natural, totally overpowered. More have died for Christ in my life than all of the centuries prior up to Christ. In the last 15 years, it's in the millions. It's 2 million plus in Sudan. And not all of the 2 million, actually it's 2 million plus, but the majority of those are Christians. The South is Christians. The Muslims from the North, those in power, they're not just wanting the land and the oil. There's no battle on earth going on between nations that the issue is neutral in regard to the kingdom. The enemy, the whole world lies under the power of the evil one. 1 John 5:19. And all that we see going on out here is the enemy trying to set some stage for some destroying, killing parts of the body of Christ and bringing an end to his purposes. And he knows the very end purposes include the Jews. And that's why they're still under such attack. I'd intended this evening, but I was unable to get them printed. But I'm going to bring several testimonies next week of some of what is going on here. But the point here is, what is the point here? The time to count the cost when you build a house is before you begin. The time to count the cost before you go into warfare is before you begin. Is that the whole illustration? If you will look carefully, the 2 verses that precede this text lay out the most difficult demands of discipleship. Verse 26 says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Verse 27, whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. He's talking about being a disciple. He's talking about the only thing that we're to become. The beginning place of what we're becoming. To many as believed on Him, He gave the right to become children, sons and daughters of God. John chapter 1, verse 12, I believe. But it begins with being made a disciple, being one who is with Him to be made. Follow me and I will make you. We are hearing two very difficult conditions of discipleship. Now somebody out there anywhere, just read me verse 33 after we get done with counting the cost. What does verse 33 say? Anyone?
So then none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his own possessions.
New American Standard, does not give up all his own possessions. Give me a King James. Who does not forsake all his own possessions. The word is adios in the Greek. That's what the Greek word is. What do you suppose that word means? To say goodbye. It is translated in a number of places in the Gospels to say goodbye, and the epistles. Here it is translated forsake or give up. And we're going to talk about this particular text one evening before this series is over. But now listen, you cannot be my disciples if your relationship with me compared to all of your relatives and families and friends isn't as far as love is from hate. You cannot be my disciple if you don't take up your own cross, deny yourself, and follow me. You cannot be my disciple if you do not say goodbye, give up, forsake all your own possessions. And couched in the middle of these, there is this counting the cost. Did anyone tell you the cost when you were called to Christ? We're doing new Christians a great disfavor. We are bringing great injury into their life when we suggest to them that it's attend Sunday school and church and pay your tithe, and the tithe is the big thing. In the church, the tithe is the big thing. Jesus is saying, no, it isn't. I want it all. I want it all. I want to be Lord of all. Are you hearing? So in the middle of this, he says, count the cost. And I'm going to say to you, when you are sharing Christ with others, don't bring them to a place that you lead them to believe that everything is all right and it is a finished salvation work. If you do not let them know where Christ intends to take them, because where He intends to take them, the world is not at all after. And that's why we have so many worldly Christians in the church, because they've never understood the conditions that Jesus laid out for being one with Him. Are you hearing? Now, this is a bow of the boat. This is a way to life over. This is a way to freedom from the fear of whether or not we can. There is such hopelessness in the church because they've never been prepared. I've shared this, I believe, before here, but we were with a brother and a sister from China who were telling us what it was like when things fell apart back from 49 through the middle 60s. The church grew through that early time of the communist takeover, but then it turned because the communists were just looking to get established and find reason to accuse. Accusation meetings. Once they turned over the church, and Daniel Xia said to his wife Ellen, said to me in his presence of his wife Ellen and my wife Patty, he said, before it was over, 90% of all Christians, even among the little flock, Watchman Nee's group, which I was holding in such high esteem, denied Christ and or betrayed their brothers and sisters. Do you know why? I mean, this is one of the reasons he gives. They had heard a gospel where God would not let His children go through such a thing. They had heard a gospel. And yet, groups like the Jesus family or the little flock, I mean, they were laying their lives down. But they couldn't believe that God would allow them. Now, we're going to just touch on something this evening. Most Christians end up angry at God because of what comes in life. Health with children, death of a relative. That's no different than the children of Israel in the wilderness without water. God brought us out here to kill us. Hungered for the leeks and the meat of Egypt. Grumbled. So much grumbling over what our Lord brings into our life, which is meant to accomplish a particular work. You will always struggle with the issues of life, finances, health issues, relational issues. If you've not crossed this bow, counting the cost, knowing where He's taking us, knowing what to expect. Because He's leading us away from Adam's life. He's leading us away from worldly man's life. He's leading us by way of the cross to the overcoming life. The time to learn that, know that, is at the beginning. In countries where it is costly to be a Christian, if you're in parts of India right now, and that's many parts of India right now, you have to weigh the cost because you know exactly what your Muslim or Hindu community is going, how they're going to treat you, and what risk there is if you accept Christ. You know, in many places, many families there, you're going to lose your family to take Christ. They already understand that given. That's one of the reasons the church is growing in much of the third world, because following Christ is so costly. They know the cost. And when they finally accept Christ, they're not blindsided. They're not caught unaware or unexpectedly in terms of what's coming. Jesus is saying here, the time to count the cost is at the beginning. There is a place for this, what I'm illustrating here, but it's not at salvation. This sneak up your hand while nobody's looking sows the wrong seed. With everybody looking, with everybody watching, with every head raised, who will now come? Am I communicating? We are building our own kingdoms when we make it so easy to join that they miss Christ and His reign in their life. The time to count the cost and know what to expect is at the beginning. You and I, in our following Christ, we both need to know where He's leading us. That's the second half this evening. And we need to know that this is a part of sharing the good news of His reign in our heart. Because we cut their legs out from under them when we've led them to believe something quite opposite. When tribulation, and by much tribulation must we enter into the kingdom. When tribulation comes, pressure from the outside, pressure we can't control. By the way, that first bow, the reign of His Lordship in our heart, deals with this issue of needing to be in control. We want to be in control of the situation, don't we? We do not want to be in a situation where we cannot fix it or know how it's going to be fixed in the natural. We do not like going to bed at night and shutting our eyes with something unresolved that's threatening us. Isn't that right? That's only right because we've yet to establish His reign. When His reign is settled, when we know that He is watching over us, we can sleep in the bow of the boat when the storm is so fierce that seasoned fishermen are crying for help. Two kinds of faith. One kind of faith has to calm the storm to be at peace. The other kind of faith can sleep through the storm because they know they're under His reign. Jesus was never threatened by the storm. There was nothing that threatened Jesus. Nothing. To Pilate, you can't do anything unless the Father lets you. We've got to establish these bows that we can only cross in obedience by faith. His reign. And it brings us into this overcoming life. Are you connecting? Is it connecting with you? You first come under His reign. That's the truth. The gospel that Jesus preached. The gospel of the kingdom. The gospel of the reign and the realm of that reign. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Verse 24. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. We have heard a gospel that when we snuck our hand up, it was settled for eternity. We were in. The Scriptures do not talk that way. I believe in eternal security. But you need to define for me what you mean by salvation. Salvation from what we've done or salvation to the life? And we'll pick on that up here in a minute. But do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable wreath. We what? They then do, everyone, verse 25, everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it, do what? Exercise self-control in all things, to receive a perishable wreath. But we do what? To receive an imperishable wreath. I mean, this is the implication of the verse. Exercise self-control, whatever that means. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. But I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself might not be disqualified. Is it possible to be disqualified in this race? It's all right that you're wrestling with that. We've heard so much of the other. You cannot fall away from a place you've not attained. I cannot fall off of the first or second or third rung of the ladder if I'm not on the first, second, or third rung of the ladder. This is the context of what now follows. Now listen. Chapter 10, verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They were water baptized, they were spirit baptized, saved from Egypt. And all ate the same spiritual food. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Jesus Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness, never to enter into the promise. Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Is that not the American lifestyle? We Christians have a right to vacations. Don't we? Oh, you already have caught a glimpse of the snare. You're afraid to answer, aren't you? You may have a right to a vacation if that's what his needs are. But he may have something else in his mind. He may want you to go to India or Africa or Latin America to serve on a mission field, working with unclean lepers all 2 weeks. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Act immorally? How many Christian families take pleasure out of watching that for which Christ died every evening on the boob tube? Finding as entertainment and fun events and situations and conditions acted out for our good pleasure. Well, it may not mean that, but it means something. You've got to deal with it. I've got to deal with it. Nor let us try the Lord, as some of them did and were destroyed by the serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. For grumbling, they didn't like what God was giving them. I want a vacation. I want a newer car. I want a nicer house. John Brown's being too legalistic, isn't he? No, I'm not. I'm saying, is he Lord? Can he say, no one of you can be my disciple who does not say goodbye to all? Does that mean that he does not give us stewardship over it? Yes. Does it mean that he will neglect us? No. But he has a single purpose for us. His. It's all about him. It's all about what he is after, what he is doing. And it's marvelous that he's included us. It's marvelous that in creation we're the center of it. We're being made his eternal dwelling place in creation. The tabernacle of the living God. It's not about us. It's not about our life. It's not about our vocation. It's not about our retirement. It's not about our life's dream. It's about him. If you do not see that, your life will be full of grumbling. Circle, underline, highlight, verse 11. These things that we have just talked about, these things we have just read, now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages have come. Why was this recorded? Why do we have this Old Testament story of the deliverance of Israel? Why did God preserve it? He preserved it for us. Because he's talking about running the race in order to win, because he can show us some of his children who didn't and never entered into the saved to. Saved from, never saved to. Left the starting line, never crossed the finish line. Am I coming through? The time to count the cost is at the beginning. He's expecting us to run to win. And He gives us many examples of both how to run and how not to run. We've just read a series of how not to.